All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Monday, July 13th, 2020 special meeting of the Board of Education of Lincoln Way Community High School District number 210. If everyone would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Linda, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Jan.
Here.
Miss Janice Doyle.
Here.
Mr. Kirky.
Here.
Mr. Lassine.
Here.
Mr. Lucetti.
Here.
Mrs. Stokes.
Here.
Mr. Costick.
Here.
All right, can everyone on the speakerphone hear us okay?
A little hard to hear. It's kind of low.
How about now?
That's better. That's better.
It's a good trade-off.
All right, we'll figure it out here in a minute. All right, so the first order of business is public comment. We do have some email questions, so I'll go ahead and read those. This was sent in by a parent, Marzena Walker. I'll just read the entire email for everybody. It says, hi, we live in Frankfurt and with our incoming freshmen are new to the high school district. Can you tell me how to get on the distribution list for future notification of school board meetings? I have the following question, and looks like there was a meeting yesterday that I just saw online. I have the following questions. If students are learning remotely in the fall, how will the board's plan address the needs, service and accommodations of students with IEPs and 504 plans? If either all or some students return to learning in school buildings, what's the plan to protect the health of children with certain pre-existing conditions, such as asthma, or children who live with others that have pre-existing conditions? What's the plan for these students so that they are not at a disadvantage if their families choose to have them continue to learn remotely when other children return to school? 3, if students return to learning in school buildings, how will tracing and family notifications work if another student or staff in the building gets sick? What's the plan if a student is exposed and must quarantine but is able to continue learning? How will their learning continue? What if a student does get sick and needs time to recover? What is the plan to get them caught back up? And I believe we'll be addressing some, if not all, of those questions this evening, and if not, we'll have Dr. Tingley or someone from the administration follow up with Ms. Walker to have a discussion with her. And with that, we would move ahead to the personnel report, employment.
All right, for employment, we have Dwight Morton, a 3/5 math teacher, going to be at the East Campus. I ask the board to approve the employment report as presented.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and a motion and a second. Can you open the vote, Linda?
Vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up on the agenda is the second draft of the fiscal year 2021 budget. And Brad, I believe that will be you. I'm going to bring the speaker over to you so I can hear you a little bit better.
Just put it right on that table if you want to.
All right, thank you. Tonight we are here to discuss and present the second draft of the FY21 budget, which will be placed on public display tomorrow as we continue the budgeting process. However, this is not the final budget, as the board still has the opportunity to discuss and adjust the budget right up until August 13th, when we have planned to schedule the hearing and budget adoption meeting. Key points for tonight. First, this budget complies with Fund Balance 420 and has a 3% surplus. The FY21 budgeted revenue versus, you will notice we've now switched to actual. So that's no longer to budget. And the increase is 7.71%, or 8.6 million without transfers. Why does that amount so much? Well, it's because if you remember when we were with the 90-day delay from the 60-day delay from Will County we actually ended up with less taxes being collected in 19. We are estimating we will collect those now in FY21, which is causing that higher amount. As far as the FY21 budget expenditures to the actual expenditures, you can see that's at 5.25, which is higher than when we were budget to budget, our 5.6 million. The reason for that is we underspent the FY20 budget by $3 million due to COVID-19 and school closure. If it wasn't for those impacts, this really would be about a 2.39% increase, so you can see the difference. We have an estimated surplus of 7.6 million without transfers, and when I say without transfers, I'm referring to the health insurance. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the estimated operating surplus is 2.8 million, or 3% without the health insurance transfer. We just look quickly here at the revenue. I want to just, and there's a detailed report in your packets, but I want to walk through the differences between the last time we met, which was May 21st, and tonight. So as already mentioned, first off, we have 2019 tax levy was not collected, 1,325,000. We expect to collect that in FY21. No changes to our CPPRT or interest income, but we did make a minor adjustment to admissions and students fees. That's to do with an athletic fee adjustment that we noticed when we were going back through the budget that we needed to decrease that. And then finally, another thing we noticed on the revenue side was under other local. Historically, we've always had a pretty good refund coming back to us from District 843. They've kind of changed their process this year, and so we don't expect to be getting that as much, so we needed to remove that, 83,000. And then finally, as we hear more and more coming out of the state, what we went ahead and budgeted for, we had only budgeted for 2 payments out of for categoricals. Now we're budgeting for 2 payments for FY20 coming out of FY 2020 because they never paid us by the end of the year. And then we're budgeting for 2 payments for FY21 plus the DCEO grant of 250,000. So that's $1,000,017. And then finally, we got our final allocation on the Every Student Succeed or CARES grant, which is coming through Title I, and that's an additional 118,000, which is be put into student laptop use. So that's the difference. I will stop right there. If there's any questions on the difference between the revenue at May to the revenue today.
So, go ahead, Chris. Oh, go ahead.
So the tax, uncollected tax, I thought was 3.5 million?
Yes, let me address that. So when you're looking at the tax, there's really 2 numbers we have to look at. First number was how much of the how much of the 2019 tax levy. When we look at that, we always kind of estimate that we get about 51% in any one budget year. Okay? So that first number I reported, 3 million, that's when we looked at it and said, okay, well, we thought we were going to get 51, we only got 49, what's the difference? It's at $3 million. Now, the second number you have to look at, though, is how Mr. Kaufman supplied that in the budget. Well, I had actually a little ahead on the budget, so the difference wasn't quite as much. We'd already had, we're trying to line up the different levies and estimating everything. So I had it estimated a little high initially. So we went back through, or I did, went back through and re-estimated, put it all into the cash flow, and it turned out we only needed an additional 1.3 million coming forward. So I had the a little high on the 2019. So remember, we're reflecting half in one year and half in the other. And so it's always, how you're getting that in there.
So was our revenue estimate too
What's
high?
that?
Was our revenue estimate then too high in 2019 by 2 million?
No, in the May version of the budget, I was a little high already on my revenue estimate.
Oh.
That was the issue. So,
And then you had the cash flow in there, and I know we're not to that yet, but looking at the one prepared in June versus July, the starting balances looked like they were up about 580,000. So what happened? Did something come in that we weren't expecting between the end of June and the last meeting?
it actually is the reverse. We didn't expend out as much as I was thinking we were going to expend out. So yeah, you'll notice when we do get to it, the FY21 beginning balances for cash are higher than where I had estimated previously. And that's because we didn't expend out as much.
And are those expenditures we wouldn't expect to make then because of not
Right.
being in class? It wasn't something that would be carried over.
No,
Correct,
not
yeah.
that we're anticipating. And when well, for the next meeting, we'll have our whole June reports, and I'll go through all the variances on the cash flow.
Do we know the 1.3, is that commercial or residential property tax? Do we have that level of specificity?
You know, okay, interesting question. So I followed up with Will County Treasurer, Tim Brody. Anyway, he did some checking for me, and he came back and he's like, I cannot break that down at that district level, those kind of numbers. So the only way we could get to those kind of numbers is I'd have to proportionally estimate them. Whether they'd be accurate or not, I don't know. So, so we really don't know where that was.
Rephrase that a little bit. Is this assuming the same collection rate as in previous years?
Yeah, well, for the 20 taxes.
Correct.
Yes, for the 20 taxes, we're assuming the same collection rate as in like 18 taxes. The 19.
I get where you're going. My question is, normally, we're at like a 99.95% collection of what is billed, not dollar.
Yes.
Percentage of collection. Does this assume the same percentage of collection billed?
Right, so normally our collection rate's about 99.8. For the budget, we always estimate 99.34 or 1/3. So we always have a little margin of safety in there, if you will.
Are you comfortable with that margin of safety based on our current?
Yeah, well, if you look at, and I don't have it in here this time, but if you look at that 10-year graph,
Right.
I mean, there's only been one time in 10 years that we were even close to not collecting. I mean, I realize we're in unusual times, but like I said, our collection rate's normally like 99.8. We've actually had years of over 100% because they had back taxes they collected. So.
How about the town? Can we talk a little bit more about the other state, the categoricals? The other state.
Other categories.
Oh, adequate. Okay, so the biggest reason for this adjustment is we didn't know if the state was or was not going to make those last categorical payments. And so when June 30 hit and they didn't make those last two, they now owe us 2 for sure in arrears. So we went ahead and we had in the previous budget budgeted for 2, but now we felt like, well, they've got 2 they owe us for last year. We think they'll probably get us 2 for the current year, so we're budgeting for 4.
You have no empirical data that says they're going to pay these 4 in whatever order. I mean, this is it's a, for lack of a better word, Brad, it's a hope.
No, this is a best guess based upon historical premise. Now, what the state said during the budgeting, and I know they can say whatever they want, but they've all said they're going to pay education, they're going to pay education. This still is 2 in arrears.
I understand.
So at the close of the year, they're still going to owe us 2. Even during 2008, they never went past 2. So I do think Brad's, for a best case scenario or best guess scenario for budgeting purposes, is to still say they're going to owe us 2.
So they never went more than 2 in arrears.
They never went more than 2, correct, Joe? They would always,
2008,
they would pay the last 2, or they would pay third quarter and fourth quarter 1 and 2,
Okay.
and then pay 3 and 4 the next year. So that would be consistent with what they've done in the past. So this is still, in terms of having two hanging out there in arrears, I think it's optimistic. I hope we get all four. But I think if we budgeted saying we're going to get 3 out of 4, that would be unreasonable.
Big difference between 08, 09 and 2020
Yeah,
is the economy didn't shut down.
sure.
The state has no shot,
Yeah.
and they're having trouble borrowing money.
Mhm.
So I'm just stating it out loud, that this errs to the side of hope. That they could want to do something, but at least in 08, 09, they had sales tax revenues and other revenues that they thought they could count on. They've got a 4-month window, and I'm not predicting anything, but it could happen again where that window doesn't stay as open and maybe gets closed a little
Sure.
bit. And I would just be very cautious about spending that money at all, because it might not materialize. It may materialize at a later fiscal period, but I'm not so sure. I would bet against that number.
So just when the state didn't have budgets, that was the same, they only got behind 2.
Correct.
State had revenues when it didn't have budgets.
When the state went 2 years without.
Right, but they had revenues though.
Yeah,
At
but
least
they
had-
weren't paying.
They had money coming in. They don't have money coming in now, Chris. There's a big difference.
I understand what you're saying. I was making sure that we weren't just using 2008 and 9 because I knew there was another period where they fell behind and were in arrears. I was just verifying that they were never.
What was interesting during that period when they didn't pass a budget, they did continually pass these little itty bitty appropriations. And so then they'd say, okay, fine, we'll appropriate the MCATs, that's what we're talking about here, mandatory categorical payments. On the prior years, we're gonna authorize that, and so then we got payments. But yes, we did get payments during that time. They were late, but they did get authorized at the end. Okay? All right, so moving on. So this here is just a graph of our revenue. I just like to remind everybody it's easy to focus in on, no doubt that 76% of our revenue comes from local property taxes, but every piece of the revenue pie is important to operations. So this just breaks it down there. Here, this is just now, here again, this is comparing 2019 actual, 2020 actuals to 21 budget. You can see here that local revenues increasing, while state is increasing a little, and federal is actually declining slightly. Now to talk about the expenditures, what has changed in the budget since we met in May. So first thing I want to say is now that we have our actual expenditures for salaries and benefits, understanding that this isn't exactly a great picture because we did have things that weren't filled, some stipends, etc. However, it did allow us to go through though and scrub the budget and make sure how the staff was lining up and where the benefits were falling. Somebody maybe went from from single to a family, or etc. So you can see we went ahead, we lowered the salary budget by $404,000 while increasing benefits by $340,000. And that's just to line up to our staffing plan the best we can. Then finally, the next thing is we had a small adjustment to athletics. Needed to reduce that by $13,000. The next thing under curriculum, we had a small adjustment there, and this is really an in and out. So this is for freshman workbooks. So we had a fee on the other side, and we have an expenditure on this side. And then, of course, as we already mentioned, we have the CARES grant for the $118,000 that's going to student laptops. This next item, unemployment. This is kind of a little back and forth between our attorney and reading the law. This might not be needed in our budget. Our attorney reads the law to say that the way this is going to work, if you haven't heard, seasonal summer employees of the district, non-professional, or non-exempt, I guess you would say, hourly staff, so paraprofessional, bus drivers, whatever, they will be able to apply for unemployment this summer, whereas in prior summers, because they had a guaranteed return of employment, they couldn't apply for unemployment. So it's a little change in the law. It sunsets January 1st of 2021. The way I read the law is that we're going to be on the hook for 50% of the cost, and 50% of the cost is going to come out of the federal CARES money. Our attorney looked at it. He feels pretty comfortable that 50% is coming out of the district pocket up front. We got to pay the state, but then when the state settles up with the federal government, they're going to rebate back to us the 50%. Either way, there could be some timing. Might come in, the reimbursement might come in next fiscal year, whatever. So at this point, I think it's a prudent thing to leave in our estimate of what we think we could, what 50% of our share of the unemployment fee. So we've got that in there for 150,000. Yeah, 150,000 increase, 190,000 total, 200,000 increase of 190,000.
So 190,000 is 50%? Or is that the
Yeah,
whole?
well,
200,000
is the total budget.
Okay.
We had 10 in there because unemployment's been minor for us, but yes, 200,000 we believe will cover the 50% that we think we could get from the state, billed by the state. Finally, the next thing we've added in there, a new line item for personal protective equipment. We've added $150,000 to make sure we have the funds available to provide all the necessary equipment that would be required by the new guidelines from ISBE.
Can you maybe go over what some of those would be? What would be looking at?
Yeah, so while the state's going to be providing face masks for students, but what happens if a student forgets theirs or something like that, so we're going to have some disposable on hand. Same way for on the bus, what if a student shows up at the bus without a face mask, have to have some disposables on hand. For staff, we're looking at having to have the protective glass or plexiglass in some areas.
Offices.
Offices,
Like when you walk into
etc.
SSO, having the plexiglass.
We'd also need to have some additional gowning and gloves for special ed aides, high need area students. And then just disposable masks on hand for in case somebody needs one. So that's it's hard to know what this is really going to cost, but we feel comfortable it's not going to exceed this amount.
Have we
I was gonna say
started?
that's your,
Hey, Brad, this is
you
Dee.
built in
I
a
just wanna
little
make
cushion
sure I'm
there
looking at
since
the
we
right-
haven't.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Deidre.
I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing. You're talking about under supplies, under regular education, why that was increased. Am I looking at the right thing? I want to make sure.
Actually, and I apologize, I don't know why I didn't think to post the presentation, but if you want to, it's really in the memo. If you look at the memo that I put in there, so the FY21 tentative budget cover, if you look at that, I am talking through those points on the summary.
A summary of changes?
Yes. And so that's the
So
list that I'm
it's
going
under
to.
expenditures, personal protective equipment, 150,000.
But
So
where
that would
it's
be
at-
the PPE.
Yeah,
Right.
I heard him, but I didn't see it. And I was looking at the document that said, the 52-page document.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I was scrolling through that, but I had printed the tentative. I have this memo, so now that you, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but I needed to. I was like,
That's
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
no, perfect.
That's okay. Then on that 52-page document, where that actually falls, I'm just going to flip there so that you can see it, is you would go to page 17,
Yep.
under regular education, 400 supplies, and you can see there that it's a big increase. Part of that increase is that 150,000.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's what I had zoned in on. I thought that I was told, but then I saw that the increase. But I think you were summarizing why there was pretty much like a $600,000 increase was because of these items here.
Right.
On the tentative budget summary.
Right, and if you look at that memo, I'm walking through that budget to budget summary, that going from the May to the July 13.
Yep, I got it. Okay.
All right, I should have pointed that out more before I started, because that's in that memo. Did you have another question?
That's okay.
Oh, PPE. So,
Yeah.
I mean, this is, well, I'll ask my question after we get to the.
Well, the other thing I will mention about the other thing I want to mention about the PPE, that is the one category that we have got approval from FEMA for 75% reimbursement. Now, we have to expend it, and then it will come back to us as a refund. But, you know, let's say for some reason we actually ran over that number, we would actually be having, revenue would be over too then. I haven't even, in this budget, because I have heard some horror stories that sometimes FEMA can be a little slow on paying. So you will notice on the revenue side, there's no FEMA reimbursement budgeted for, because the chances are we may collect it outside of the FY21 budget. So we may collect it sooner, but I've just heard that FEMA can be a little slow. But we are approved for that. Go ahead.
Brad, quick question. So is this a grant that you had to apply for, or is this just something available for everyone? And FEMA does pay sort of slow, so I think it's good that it's not in the revenue side.
Yeah, so with FEMA, this is honestly, this is my first time going through them. I've never been in a national disaster area. But the process is once that's declared and you're in the area, you then have to make application via the state of Illinois through the emergency management into FEMA. So we did that several months ago, and we got notification back via the state of Illinois that our application for reimbursement had been accepted. So it's not exactly like a grant, it's an application for reimbursement of qualified expenditures.
So, when I raised my hand a minute ago,
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
that's what I was gonna ask you, if we're that qualified. So since you said it does, you know, do we wanna be first in line? I mean, it's not like we're not going to need PPE
That's my
equipment.
question. Have we
Spend
started
money.
buying stuff yet?
Yeah,
Get first in line.
So here's how it's working. So you have to make the expenditures, and we
Right.
are purchasing some things, and we are in the process of purchasing some stuff for fall.
Right.
As soon as we get that purchased, we are then going to go ahead and submit our first application for reimbursement. So we're going to keep the reimbursement process. I mean, you could wait clear to the end, but I see no reason to
Right.
do
No.
that. So
I'm
we're
saying
going
spend
to
money
ask
now.
for reimbursement as we go.
It's not like, you know, you're gonna need this for years to come. I mean, I don't think masks and gloves and cleaning are gonna go away, even if we do a good winter.
All right, any other questions on that item?
So you expect that line item to be a gross number of 150,000, correct? Of which maybe 75% could be reimbursed.
Right. That's our
For
expectation.
how many students?
What?
For how many students do we have?
7,000.
6,000. That's for just PPE. The additional cleaning and some of those other things are included in the actual budget. So we're just talking masks, gowns, shields for the 150,000.
So the next item on the list is a built-in and actual contingency of 510,000. So this was to provide funding for unforeseen expenditures during this period of unknown. And then finally, all other changes, it was 175,000. This included things for like removing all styrofoam, the budget increase because, you know, some different things. Anyway, the whole thing all across the entire budget, 175,000. Coming up a total of 1.1 million. That's the difference between last time's budget and this time's budget. Realizing the biggest part of that is, you know, the contingency, the PPE, and the unemployment number. So, So if you take a look at the expenditures, here again, graphically, you can see salaries and benefit are the largest part of our thing, but there we do. We have a 1%, almost 1% contingency across the district, and all the other categories. So comparing, this graph compares the actual of 19 to the actual of 20 to the actual of 21. This would probably be the first time I probably ever say this, but salaries, benefits, professional services, and supplies were actually, in FY20, were actually lower than in FY19. And that's due to COVID and the extended school closure. So salaries, benefits, professional services, and supplies were actually lower than 19. This here is just a summary. This summary is in the 52-page book, if you will, also. But what I just want to really highlight here, so now we're comparing, we got our actuals, and then the budget. So we're looking at 120 million in revenue, 113 million in expenditures. I didn't talk about this, but I want to bring this up. Transfers in. So this is our net transfer in, $5 million. And that's where we're expecting, when we sat down and looked at the health insurance, we know we're going to have some run out time with the affiliation. So we have about a little over $8 million with the affiliation. They're going to pay some benefit expenditures for us. And then at the end, we'll get the remaining transferred back to us. We think that'll be more like $5 million, not the initial that I put in at 8. And then we're planning on transferring to Fund 60 of $3,350,000, and that will be for funding, future funding of capital expenditures. So overall, we're expecting, including transfers, 12.6 million, all fund surplus. Without transfers, 7.6 million. We expect our ending fund balance to expenditure ratio for all funds to be about 36%. Then if you look at this on an operating basis, we're looking at about 100,000 in revenue, 100 million in revenue, 94 million in expenditures. Here again, the net transfers, because we have one of the transfers is going to a non-operating fund, so we're going to have the net of 1.6 million. We're anticipating 7.8 million in total surplus without the transfer, 2.8 million or 3%. Fund balance, we're estimating to be at about 25 million, and that's going to represent about 27% of expenditures. So our goal is 33%, so we're closing in about 6% away by the end of 21. And with that, I go ahead and entertain questions that they might have on the budget.
So the contingency. I understand that there's going to be costs that we have to come up with, but I mean, I think from a transparency standpoint, and the budget should represent our best estimate of revenues and expenses. I mean, that's why I'm asking, like PPE, if you're already adding that in, if cleaning's already added in somewhere that we're not seeing here, if any technology that we need because there might be some more remote learning, if substitute teachers are already included, we might need to put a contingency in here for substitute teachers because, there could be more illness and you want to have a good stay at home when you're sick type of plan in place. I understand that. To put something in here, just say contingency, we might have $500,000. I understand we're in a time of great unknown, but I mean, I think this is the board giving you kind of the budget and the plan to work from. And I think it should be more transparent than just putting in 500 for contingency. I know maybe in 2016, I don't know, 1 year, we did slightly use the
But I think
contingency.
it was 150,000.
Yeah, and that was when we were like, if we would have gone over on the expense side. Now, I understand there might be some concerns where revenues don't come in, but I don't think you put a expense contingency in there to kind of offset to balance that out. That's just my feeling on that. I don't know what the PPE number should be, if 150,000 is a good number, but I think from a monitoring accountability standpoint, if we think I mean, what are these additional costs going to be? Well, it could potentially be PPE being higher, then we should put in a higher number for PPE. I mean, have you ever used a budget line just to put in $500,000 for unforeseen
We have not.
expenditures? I'm Brad, and in another district?
No, not in my other districts.
Well, let me take that before you answer that. Could we create a contingency, but make it come to the board before it's expended?
Well, absolutely. I mean, just because it's a contingency in the budget, I would say the first thing would be is anytime the contingency is going to be used, the board would need to be apprised. I don't know if there needs to be an actual vote, but certainly apprised of it. But to answer Mr. Luchetti's question, you know, in my prior districts, we never worried about having a contingency because we were always running surplus budgets. And so we just understood that, okay, maybe if revenue is a little short or the expenditure is a little long, we always just try to manage it, throughout the whole year to make sure we kind of hit the target. If we were slightly off or slightly better, we just kind of came out over the few years. But nothing material. That's part of the things. One of administration's jobs is to manage the budget. So if we see something's running too high or too low, we need to make adjustments during the year to try to adjust for that as much as possible. One way to adjust for that is to have a contingency. I personally have not used them in the past, but that doesn't mean you can't use them. But that means districts obviously do use them.
My area of concern in our current budget is the personnel line item. We decide to go back to school, and we have a handful of teachers decide we're not coming. They have doctor's notes, which means they'll have to be paid, and then we have to go out and hire additional teachers. The other consideration, and something that we're going to have to determine right away, is the number of students that are going to stay home and not come to school. How does that impact our master schedule, and are we in position where we have to hire a couple additional teachers? Those are my only concerns in terms of going through the budget kind of line by line and saying, okay, each department has kind of what they need, each principal has what they need. Those are the only concerns I would have, and I think that I understand where Chris is on the contingency, but I also understand the concept of this is kind of an unforeseen. I would certainly think if we dip into that, it's something that would be brought to the board. 150,000, Joe, that's our best estimate right now on PPE. It might not be enough, but that's sitting and doing the calculation of what it costs now. Now, masks could get more expensive again, wipes could get more expensive again. We've been able to buy some of that in bulk, but you just don't know where those are going to go. And I think so, kind of where, I mean, as Brad said, this doesn't have to be approved by the board tonight. This is what goes on display. We do believe that in August we'll have a better look. We'll kind of know. I hope to kind of know where we're going to be at the opening of the school year, and if we've had to hire an additional teacher or two, and what that number will look like. But we certainly want to get all your thoughts again this evening as we continue to work through this and put this on display tomorrow.
Can you explain, if students stay home, you need more teachers?
So if we have a situation where, let's say we have 4 students of every section say we're not coming in, we're going to stay at home. we're going to have to provide an avenue for those students to be taught. There may be some additional cost. So let's say once at West, let's just use West as an example. We have, at the end of the day, there are 28 algebra students that are staying home. So that's one section. So that's a section that's hanging out there. So let's say we've got one Algebra 1, one Algebra 2, one Geometry. So there's 3 sections of math. Our options are, do we offer an overload to our current teachers? So that would be around 40,000 probably, Rob? About 40,000 to cover those 3 sections of math. Or do we hire another math teacher and cover those 3 plus an Algebra 1 at Central and an Algebra 2 at Central? With some of our electives, we'll have more flexibility, but our math, our science, and our English, and our social science, those may be a couple sections per building. Once we get that information out get the information back from the parents. Talked with several districts of how they're going to manage it. We've talked to our own teachers about how they want to manage it. Do we take them off of the roster? One of the things we've discussed is they have to commit a semester at a time. You're going to stay home. You have to commit for the entire semester, and then we build the roster off that. Now, one of our options, if the numbers are a little bit larger than we anticipate, to go ahead and rebuild our master schedule, and just to take a section out and rework the entire schedule so that there's one less Algebra 1 section. Let's say we've got 28 kids, pull those 28, we redivide, and we redo the master schedule. And then that way, one of our math teachers who elects to stay at home, here's your 5 sections of math. So it would work out in those scenarios. That's much easier in the grade school setting to do because everyone is tracked. It's more complicated in ours because of all of our levels. Would we be able to honor or to offer our honors bio, or science? I don't know. That's something we're going to have to look at. It might just be if you're staying home, it's biology. And you would commit by semester.
What's the timeline on
Is
this?
there an opportunity for a mixed group, meaning some kids from East, some kids from Central, some from West?
Yes, if they are online, that's something we can do, and we've already looked at that. And then Joe asked what the timeline is. Timeline of that is in the next 2 weeks. After we have a discussion this evening on some of our reopening plans, I'm getting information out to the parents this week, similar to what we're discussing tonight. And shortly after that will be the question to the parents, if your child is opting out, you need to complete this form and send it to the school. And we'll have to have that all completed so we can rework the master schedule if the numbers dictate that. Now, if the numbers work to where it's a section per building, I think we'll be able to manage that. We may be able to manage that with the teachers that are going to opt to stay home. We've asked teachers, are they coming back? In the next 10 days, 2 weeks, we're going to have to ask the hard, dead fast, are you going to come back if we're in session? And, because we'll need the commitment.
Scott?
Yes.
So the opting out, that doesn't make them homeschooled? We're responsible going forward? Is that something new or has it always been that way?
No, this is with this particular scenario that we're dealing with now. We have to provide that option.
Okay.
Yes.
When we provide that option, they're done. They're off campus.
Can't do
There's
it.
no-
I can't hear.
His question is this something new? And then if we provide that option, they're home off campus. Yes, it would be for the semester. So for the semester, they're at home.
There's no football, no drama, no speak. There is no coming on campus. If you're off campus, you're not dabbling and coming here for extracurricular.
Well, that would be something the board would have to decide at our August meeting.
Okay.
Well,
If you're out, you're out.
how does the bubble exist
For
after
that?
5 o'clock and not before?
I think that's a good point, Joe, and I think that's something
You're
we
out,
would be
you're
able
out.
to enforce. But that would be, I'd run that past our attorney first, but that does make sense. If you're going to be home, you're going to be home.
Right.
How can you come back and play chess or whatever?
And I know we're mixing our medicines here because we're going to talk
Yeah, I
about
know. We're
opening
gonna
or
do
not
that,
opening,
yeah.
but they're so intertwined because I'm still fascinated by the whole concept of $150,000 for 6,000 students. So somebody shows up at the bus or at the school door, and they don't have one of these things, and it's the 10th day in a row they don't bring it. You're gonna just keep handing them masks. We have to keep handing them masks.
Yeah, we'll give them a mask.
So hypothetically, that could be $1,000 a day. Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, yes.
I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here.
Yep.
We're talking about 13 to 18-year-old individuals, young adults, that, you know, they didn't bring their masks, so we're not gonna send them home, so we're gonna continue to provide that.
Yeah.
Which we have to, I understand that. And that's part of where I'm struggling with this whole, there's such a Brad, I read this like 3 times, and I know you're in a no-win situation. I didn't think the contingency was enough. I'm like, I could blow this out of the water by, you know, Labor Day, not knowing what I don't know. And so that's where I was kind of fascinated by the conversation there, because I wrote down all the PPE stuff in addition to about 3 other things, personnel,
Yeah.
technology. I mean, I was going on and on and on, and I'm like, we don't know what we don't know, and then there's a variable factor there that we're not going to turn people away. And we're talking about, you're probably going to need extra people if you're going to, you know, and again, I know we're mixing medicines here, so we can talk about that later. Are we taking temperature every day? I mean, who's going to do that?
We've kind of already discussed the plan.
I know, but I mean,
Yeah,
it's
you're
gonna,
right.
but if they're doing that, then they're not doing whatever else they should be doing.
Mhm.
There's going to be a qualitative factor that's going to start to kick in.
Sure.
And other things, I thought with a $100 million budget,
Mhm.
that less than 0.5% of contingency, even though the PPE, and again, I thought the PPE was light, was like, okay.
Yeah.
I hope this works, but I've said it before, and I'll say it again, hope isn't a good business strategy.
Sure.
Well, and I think the other thing that you have to realize, not that, I mean, the district administration will manage the budget to meet fund policy 420. But in a sense, we're talking about a $500,000 contingency, and we're talking about $2.8 million surplus, plus we're talking about $3.3 million that we're setting aside for capital expenditures. So let's just say that it really goes to heck on us. At the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to make sure we don't run a deficit, meaning we literally spent more than we took in. So now if you take and add all those up, you're talking about $6 million. I don't see us going south by $6 million.
No, I agree with you, but
And
with
then
all
in
due
addition
respect,
to that, didn't you say, Brad, didn't you say too that we'll get 75%, we don't know when, of any PPE, or is there a cap on that for the PPE?
No, there's no cap on it, and then so you're right. Let's say that PPE ends up being $1,000 a day, and I mean, I guess technically, FEMA could say, hey, we're out of money, but as long as we're asking for reimbursement on a quick basis, again, if you will, being first in line, because that's how FEMA is going to work. It's going to reimburse until they run out of money, and then they'll close the disaster. So, I mean, there's another,
okay, so
if you will.
Just again, in this conversation, what's included in the disaster? Is it the additional teachers? Is it additional technology? Where does the line stop, or does it have to be physical gowns, plexiglass, masks? Do we know what that makes up?
Yeah, so we're going through the FEMA application. The things that qualify under this disaster as defined by Congress would be personal protective equipment, additional cleaning that required overtime or extra staff for disinfecting, etc. Any kind of like computer technology, extra staff for providing teaching, none of that is covered under FEMA. So really, for us, it's additional cleaning and PPE is really what qualifies for school districts.
PPE for the virus stuff.
I'm
not
sorry?
PPE just for virus stuff, not like stuff we've traditionally spent.
Yeah,
Like, we
Like
always
work
had
gloves
so-
or safety.
Yeah,
gloves.
right.
right, personal protective equipment related to protecting against COVID-19
For
virus.
students and staff, or just for
What's
staff?
that? Student and staff,
okay.
yeah, student and staff.
I mean, to Joe's point, we don't know what we don't know. I mean, how are we gonna plan for what happens, September 2nd? And now we need to spend $1 million on PPE, or 750,000, or we need to hire 5 new teachers. I mean, we're not gonna be able to drill down that tonight, or even, August 18th.
No.
Until we get here and it starts happening. I mean, we gotta plan the best we can, but
And that's why I think we're in a, it's rare that I'd say that, financially, we're in a fortunate position right now that we have the surplus in the budget to withstand something like this. 4 or 5 years ago, this would have been a disaster if we were sitting having this discussion. And so now, as Brad said, with everything that is in place, I don't see a scenario where we're short, where there's a $6-7 million swing. That's, could it happen? Yeah, it could. I don't see a scenario. I think if things get bad enough to where we're having to spend this type of money, we're likely going to be shut down. And when we're shut down, we just illustrated we don't spend as much money when we're shut down as we do when we're operating. But that's just kind of a broader view of this. I appreciate the conversation, and I think everyone makes really good points. We don't know what we don't know. And so I think a budget has to be based upon kind of what you know with some anticipation. I think it's tough to anticipate, or maybe, I don't know, if we want a budget for the actual worst, I still think we have some of that in there because of the surplus that is budgeted.
So,
Go ahead.
to Joe's point, I agree with him. It comes up to what, $25 a kid? Expenditure that. But it's easier to, with board approval, spend it out of contingency if you need more than if you put it in PPE and try to spend it on something else, correct? If we up the.
Yeah, so Rich is asking if we put it all in PPE, that becomes more difficult for us to spend on other emergencies than if it's in contingency. The answer to that is yes, because if we put it in a line item for PPE and we have to hire 3 new nurses, it would be easier for us to be able to have it in contingency, come back to the board and say, we needed 3 new nurses because our secondary rooms, what do we call those?
Isolation room?
Our isolation rooms, we've got 3-4 kids in there at a time. We've got to have another nurse on staff. Yes.
in isolation room, you mean someone that has a temperature, starts
Correct.
exhibiting symptoms.
Correct.
one of-
Yep.
And this budget that we're looking at here, that assumes kind of a fall reopening of music and art and plays and sports and things of that nature.
Right, at
For the
this
most part.
point.
Yeah. Yes.
Can I move, I'm gonna move off the contingency just for a couple. Food services, is that a net sum gain?
Pretty
There's no
much,
margin in
so,
food services?
right, so, I didn't know, take food service out, leave food service in, but we left in the revenue for food service and we left in the expenditures. It's looking like food service is not going to be, anyway.
We're still going to have discussions. Right now, food service is a challenge for us with the limit of 50 people in any one area. So.
You know, but
So
we
they
don't
come-
know, maybe by January.
So yeah,
it's
to answer your
opened up.
question, it would offset.
But it
I just wanted to
offsets.
make- I just wanted to make sure. Let's talk transportation just for a minute. So again, I know this is all under, hey, we're open and everything's kind of moving forward with some opt-out. I tried to find it and I couldn't find it when I was looking for it. I could have looked harder. Does our contract state with the other underlying districts that if we have variable expenses due to the transportation, like having to clean the buses on a much more regular basis, or having to add an additional person to the bus to take temperatures, check for PPE or whatever, that all gets shared equally with them?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's in our master agreements we have with them.
Okay.
And I will just say that we've been working Mike and Transportation has been working diligently routing not only Lincoln Way, but also all the elementaries to making sure they're meeting the guidelines and how the routes are gonna go and all of that, so.
So any other variable expenses get shared.
Right, like for example, mask. If a student shows up and doesn't have a mask and we have to give the student a mask, that's gonna be charged to the elementary.
Is transportation taking temperatures before they get on the bus?
I'm not sure on that.
No, every feeder is doing it a little bit differently now, Joe. So some of our
So you
feeders
understand how
are,
fascinating that is, right? So you can put 40 people on a bus and somebody's got a temperature?
Yes.
So when they get into the building,
check them before they come in.
yeah, that makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
Because now you've infected 40 people, then you now let 39 of them run through the building. If we're gonna play the game, you gotta play the game
Yeah,
in a
and,
microbiologist way, not in a, oh, we're just gonna do this and hope.
yeah, and I don't know whether the grade schools are doing a self-check anyway. I don't know. We're still in conversations there. I believe we're going to most likely check the students as they come in.
And we're expecting the driver to do that?
No, bus, we haven't talked about that yet. That's on our list. So it would be
This
tough.
is where the contingency kicks in. This is where
Yeah.
all of a sudden things become scalable, where it was $18 an hour to operate a bus, or 20 or whatever it is for the human resources, now it goes to 36.
Sure.
Because you gotta have a second person on the bus, and even though it's shared, it's still a cost.
Yeah.
See, this is where I like the contingency that's in there. I'd rather err to the side of, if 500,000 is the number everybody agrees with, I get it, but I can visualize a world that we're in right now, that we're just having a half-hour discussion on, that as you start poking holes in this, we had questions from parents prior to the meeting. That was one parent.
Sure.
This thing gets to a point where you're like, okay, you know, it blows the budget out of the water.
So, at our last meeting, we discussed a contingency, and I don't think we had a vote or anything, we kind of all agreed at 500 in a sense of, you know, Brad put that in, let's see what it looks like. Now you're saying more, Chris is saying no contingency, or just contingency with more, you know, protocol?
I think when you budget, you're setting the base case. And when you have $6 million plus in surplus, you set up a plan like, okay, we have 420 in place. If expenses start running, you're gonna reduce that, and you have to, with the contingency, do you have to, if you put a contingency in here and you actually spend it, and say you go over 10% or whatever it is in any of the categories, do you have to redo the whole budget, like posting the budget, everything like that?
If you would need to amend the budget.
Right.
And that's one of the points I was going to bring up. You know, a budget is our plan at this moment in time. Let's say we get into October and we have a new reality. Well, maybe we then sit down and we discuss it as a board, and we come up with a new budget, and we file a budget amendment, and we amend the budget to the new reality. Maybe the new reality is we're 100% closed, and then we got to do something different, you know. A budget is definitely manageable and amendable, and the board can choose to do that on a monthly basis.
So that's my case, is like you put a budget out there for base case, because even if you have this contingency in there and you have to put it towards something, you're gonna have to amend the budget anyways. And that way you go, at that time you can go talk about whatever it is. But I mean, to me, the big thing is the surplus you have, right? And okay, you have the surplus and you have capital projects. There's definitely things, we're deferring capital projects this year, so there's definitely things on that capital projects list that need to be done, right? So I think you're prioritizing, like, okay, let's say there are unforeseen expenses in here. How are you going to pay for those? Is it coming out of 420? Is it going to come out of the capital projects going to be reduced? Because we're not even talking about it. I think capital projects went from what did it go from 2.5 to 3.5 in this budget. So you've added $1 million from the May budget to here.
Right.
So I think there's already
Contingencies.
your contingencies are already in there, is my point. Because we're also, the contingency is only on the expense side, right? Where I think you're going to run into, if we were to somehow run into this $6 million, like get a big piece in there, I think it's gonna be on the revenue side, the unforeseen stuff where taxes aren't collected to where you have,
Right.
or the state only pays, the state can't issue debt and they can't pay these things out.
Right.
So, I mean, that's what I'm viewing the budget as more of. It should be set up as kind of our base case. Here's what we're estimating. Here's, what they're estimating is the best case, because I think that's more transparent. And if you do use that contingency into the education fund or whatever, you're going to have to amend the budget anyways. So that's my reasoning there. But I understand that.
I don't care if you call it a contingency item. I just think that we took what we did last year, and that's gonna work going into this year. From an expense side, first and foremost, I just gave you one small example. Like, if I had a parent going to any one of the feeder districts or this district, and you told me you were gonna take their temperature when they got to school, not when they get on the bus, I'd wanna meet with the science department right away. Okay, so there's one example. The other side, I totally agree with you. I think the revenue side of this is actually where the greater risk is, to be honest. I think that we're at a fascinating point in a lot of different functions. So whether we build it in, we bump up personnel expense by 3% as a contingency. But I just don't want us to sit there and say, well, we're running at a, aspect of what we did last year. I don't understand that logic because the world's not the same as it was last year.
Well, I don't know that we, I mean,
Well, without
maybe we have to go,
without
maybe we have to look at
we
the,
wouldn't.
pardon?
Without the contingency, other than PPE, everything
Cleaning,
else
I
is-
thought there was cleaning in here.
Cleaning's
I
in
thought
there.
this,
Cleaning's
I
in
thought
there.
you
It
would
is.
put in for, is there
Yeah,
anything
but it
for
wasn't
subs?
dramatically.
Yeah, subs we've increased, cleaning we've increased. If we don't have the contingency, it would be my recommendation that we put more money back into salaries. Just because of the unforeseen, as we talked about with section.
Yeah, and so I'm not, that I'm fine with. I mean, I think it should just be our best, our base case for right now, what we think is gonna happen, that's all. If you think that you would add the salaries, then
So does it
I think it should be spelled out, that's all.
Does it make sense to
That's
move
all.
on to look at the cash flow and also the school reopening plans?
I agree with you. I'm gonna get off with one more question. I understand what you're saying, and I think we're on the same page. We're just trying, you're slicing the pizza into 8 pieces, I'm slicing it into 4 because I eat fast.
I like 4 pieces.
But if it was in the if we just had a line item contingency, and we said that this would be more trackable, that if 8 different line items were 1% over, and we said it was all related, I would say, you know what, this was a line item, but this expense occurred because of, and we tracked it, is that actually more transparent? Just because we don't know what's going in the bucket, when stuff comes out of the bucket, we could say, yeah, it went for X, it went for Y, it went for Z.
5 subs, or another bus run.
I've just thrown it out there as another example. That's why I asked at the very beginning of this conversation, is the accountability for $500,000. I'm not taking it lightly at all. You jumped a $500,000 bill, I'm gonna go pick it up. But I'm also saying that it keeps the budget as the budget is, but knowing that there's an unknown out there, and as the stuff comes through the unknown, we get to see that almost as a separate line item on a monthly basis.
That makes
Well,
sense.
you don't put anything through contingency.
You can create a GL, put anything you want
You
through.
don't expend out of contingency.
Right. You just move
Yeah, but
it.
you could create a general ledger and through different entries, have it go through the contingency and then come back out through whatever GL you wanted it to.
Well, what you could do is you could do a separate tracking mechanism saying, okay, here's the contingency, and then we could keep where it was moved to.
I understand.
But you do not expend out of contingency. You have to.
We're saying the same thing. I mean, it's a phantom transaction, that at least you'd have accountability as to where that 500,000.
Yeah, we could keep a separate sub-ledger, if you will, a report showing, you know, where it was earmarked for.
COVID-related costs?
What's that?
COVID-related costs?
Well, yeah, it's obviously, yeah, it's gonna be COVID related because it's gonna be abnormal to our normal operation.
Well, we're not going to go out and buy new basketballs with contingency.
No.
Right, to your point.
Well, if we did, then that would be a different discussion at the meeting where 5 new basketball hoops showed up coming out of contingency. We'd be like, yeah, that's not what
Right,
this was for.
you know,
We'll
eight
authorize it.
subs on, you know, this day where, you know.
I agree with, I think we're heading in the same direction. I'm just trying to find a way to keep it so that we can track what it is, that's all.
Well, if we decide on a contingency, we can certainly track and report of, okay, here's where the money went from contingency to salaries or whatever. You know, we would do that as part of the budget amendment process.
Well, you got time to discuss it.
Yeah, no, I mean, the conversation's good.
I'm done.
So Brad, it sounds like what we're approving is based on today, but based on what we might, how this may all look very different in the next couple of weeks.
Right, we certainly, between now and August 13th, we can have more discussions. And even by October, if something substantially has changed, we manage the budget by having a budget amendment. You know, we'll have a hearing and the board will amend it. But, you know, budgets are manageable. They're not something that can't be managed, and we should expect to do that this year.
Well, and as we talk further tonight, the plan for
Makes sense.
reopening and coming back to school is going to dictate what people start to decide, opting out or staying home, and what the budget will need to look like based
Right.
on those factors.
Okay, do we want to talk about cash flow?
Yes.
Okay, so on the cash flow, Mr. Lucetti already mentioned it, but you will notice if you looked at the prior iteration of the FY21 cash flow, the 7/1 estimated cash balances are higher because we did.
Brad, I'm gonna stop you one more second, I'm
Yep.
sorry. So are we now at the fiscal year 2021 cash flow projections?
Yes.
One sheeter?
So
And then are we
D2
still on the, I'm listening.
Okay, so we're on item D2, and if you want to click on the actual, not the cover, but the actual cash flow based on 713 budget.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you spelling that out. I just got to jump into this. Okay, so I am looking at
No,
page
it's okay.
page 1 of that cash flow, and as already mentioned, the estimated beginning cash balances are higher because we didn't expend as much. I did get today from Old Second their tax exempt rate that they're indicating as of today would be 2.05%. We're currently at 2.45%, so that's 40 basis points lower than we currently are. You'll see on my cash flow, based on estimated tax collection and $5 million coming in from health insurance and on October 1st, bottom line, go clear to the very last page, which I believe is page 4. You can see we're estimating to need $6.2 million in tax anticipation warrants, which brings me to what I want to discuss next. The difference between taxable and tax-exempt tax anticipation warrants. Prior to me coming to the district did taxable warrants, which have a less stringent criterion that the district needs to follow and meet. The reason why is because when you issue tax-exempt TAWs, or tax anticipation warrants, the IRS now becomes a partner. Because basically, you're saving interest expense because people out there are willing to buy those at a lesser rate because they're not paying taxes on it. So now you've introduced a third party, if you will, the IRS. And Mr. IRS is very nice about that, but he only wants you to borrow exactly what you need. Now, I know the board has put out there that they want a not to exceed 25 million resolution for our next meeting. However, based on how taxes have came in July, we will reestimate this in August. I'll be very conservative, but I'm just going to tell you right now, we're not going to be able to produce a tax or a cash flow that actually shows a deficit of 25 million. I just don't see that doomsday of happening. So I'll produce, and we'll get it out to the board in advance. But the bottom line is the attorneys have to review and determine that this is a viable cash flow, and then we can get that authorization.
So what's the spread between taxable and tax exempt?
It's typically about over 1% spread between taxable and tax exempt.
So, I mean, I think we should do the analysis of, you know, when, based on your cash flow, when we're going to borrow, when we're going to pay it back, and what our interest cost would be under tax exempt versus taxable. Because if you're making a decision then on kind of a margin of safety of having 25 million versus whatever you come up with costs X dollars.
Is it taxable on the full 25 million or just
No,
the difference?
it's the amount you have
The 19 or whatever.
outstanding. No, it's the amount you have outstanding. So, I mean, we're not even looking at
Well, 6.2.
6.2 million,
So it'd be 18.8.
but that's not even over a full year. So,
Average.
just because the amount we're borrowing has come down so much,
Sure.
I think that we could make that, I would propose we make that analysis.
I'll put together that analysis. The other thing the cash flow that we're going to prepare for August 13th would be conservative cash flow. What the cash flow in front of you today is more of what I'd say optimistic or best case. So obviously we're going to take a look at, well, more delay in taxes. Maybe earlier expenditure in some, delay in getting the money from the health insurance. So we'll factor all those things in, but I'm just telling you, my gut says we're not going to be at 25 million. So I just didn't want anybody surprised at that, because just because Old Second is willing to loan us 25 million, and just because the board is willing to borrow 25 million, that isn't possible under tax exempt. You have to be able to demonstrate that you could reasonably have a deficit of 25 million. So I will need to put those together, but I'll certainly do the analysis between tax and taxable.
But will we have a chance to make a decision on that before it goes to the lawyers and?
Sure, certainly.
Okay. I mean, I just think the cost is going to be less than than 50, probably less than 30.
Yeah, it's going to be
6 million
definitely.
at a percent. Yeah, I mean 30,000. Yeah, 30.
Between the two.
Yeah.
Assuming it's a full 1% higher, I think.
Right,
that
I don't think it is.
spreads
I
a
don't
little-
think that's.
Yeah, a little aggressive.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll follow PMA. Anyway, I just wanted to give that heads up, because I will do that analysis, we'll work through that. We can get both out to the board in advance, so the board has the opportunity to look at that. We can certainly, but we're going to need to be prepared on the 13th to discuss that and be prepared to go A or B, Okay? Any other questions on the cash flow? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Have a good night.
So that's it, right?
For me.
For him, yeah. We did include then, we'll have a discussion here of reopening and go through some different scenarios. Just set it right there on that corner, Brad. That way they can hear me. So in your backup materials, for those of you who are calling in, is the PowerPoint that I'll cover. And we'll just kind of get started. Stop me at any time to ask questions, but there will be opportunities to ask throughout the presentation. We are in phase 4 of Restore of Illinois. Gatherings of 50 people or fewer are allowed. So it's time to at least make an attempt to go back to school. June 23rd, we received guidance from ISB and the Illinois Department of Public Health. Guidance document is on a link in here addressing the return to school for this fall. Some of the highlights: face coverings will be required at all time. Temperature checks or self-certify. I've been in different Zoom meetings with districts that are considering the self-certify, go to an app, parent certifies, hits a button, it goes directly to school. We're still working on that. We're still having some discussions there on the self-certify versus temperature checks as we enter the building. Limit of 50 people to any one space. That's a challenge for us, for our cafeteria areas.
Scott,
Yes,
wait, you want to wait till the end, or can we jump in? And
go ahead.
So cafeteria area,
Yep.
we have those pop walls we use in construction all the time. Literally, it's just a stick with a spring in it. I could divide this room in two in probably less than 3 minutes. It goes, it pushes against the.
Yeah.
I can't hear him.
Here, we're talking about just putting in temporary barriers in a cafeteria or some of our large spaces. And we're not to that point yet. Right now, ISB is discouraging that. I've talked to several superintendents, however, who view the curtains that you drop in the field house as barriers because of the large space. The only place we would be able to utilize those types of walls would be in the cafeteria. Right now, our building principals are working on plans to not have to do that and still be able to put 50 students in places.
How big is the lunch? You know, how big is a normal lunch period?
Well, we're anywhere from 150 to 400 students in a lunch if we all come at one time.
I mean, in a normal
Normal lunch, our largest lunch would probably be 400, am I right?
Correct.
Yeah. Largest lunch is
So you
400.
need 8 spaces.
So we need 8 spaces of 50. Yeah. Which we can do at East. That's our largest lunch period. Central, it's a little bit easier because you've got actually three cafeterias if you use the north cafeteria. West, the way West is set up, they can use the stage and also the lobby of the auditorium, and that would give them 150, plus the Warriors Lodge right there around the corner, which could be another 50, which is 200. So we would be able to work through that. The problem's going to be serving lunch. How do you get 150 kids through a line, socially distanced, and then get them in their lunch back to where they have to go to eat it? So I don't see how that's going to happen, and that's something we're working
Taco
on.
trucks.
Pardon me?
Taco trucks.
Yeah, line the
Line
trucks
them up
up.
outside.
Can something stop you there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Self-certify? Like, nobody's ever Tylenol'd up their kid to send them to school?
Exactly, and that's the first, when we had our task force together, we said, okay, how many people back in the child care days gave your kid Tylenol to get at least through the first half of the day? And you're exactly right, Joe, and we're gonna have to really hit hard on the personal responsibility. If you have a sore throat, if you run a fever, you have to stay at home. That's why we're kind of leaning towards the temperature checks right now. We bought several of the, and we've been using them in all of our camps. So our students that are participating in camps get their certification. The coaches keep a record of it, and that allows the kids to continue to participate. So something we're looking at.
The other problem with self-certify, the way you described it, is the parent has to put in the app. What if they don't?
I know,
You
then you got the
you can't
kid
stop.
showing.
How do you stop the
Kid
child
from
from
taking
coming
it. I know.
into the school?
I know, it.
That first barrier is the bus, Scott. I mean, that's.
Yeah, you're right. It is.
What's the number of absences the students allowed in a year before we start to look at, like, you know, truancy or anything like that? I mean, every day a kid wakes up, so, you know, my throat hurts.
Yeah, there's not a number on it
No.
anymore, to be honest with you, Aaron. For
I don't feel
a
good.
truancy case to become a truancy case,
10%.
10%, so it'd be
That's chronic absenteeism.
chronic absenteeism would be
I
the
mean, are
10%.
those numbers still gonna apply to, you know, when we get report cards, things like that for the school?
Probably not this year or next.
I mean, if we're telling kids, you know, hey, do you feel okay, don't come to school.
Yeah.
I don't know, I was 15, I just don't feel okay.
Yeah, but you have to do that. You have to do that.
So, back to this, social distancing a priority, no use of lockers, try and limit the sharing of items, increase cleaning and disinfection, and then normal grading. Now, the cleaning and disinfection, every winter we ramp up our cleaning around flu season. We add additional deep cleanings. In terms of what we're looking at this fall, we're looking to add additional cleaning, particularly cleaning throughout the day. We have to keep door handles wiped down. We have to keep the surface areas clean. But the mitigation for spread of this is the person-to-person and the social distancing. It seems to be the airborne transmission of this disease, but we will certainly have increased cleaning, and that is something that will be detailed in our final plan that's brought forth to the board. So face coverings, 6 feet apart, washing hands. We put additional sanitary stations throughout the building, and we'll continue to keep those updated and filled. Show symptoms, stay home, but then the continuity of education. So kind of some philosophies. We believe that in-person learning to the greatest degree possible is the best thing within the guidelines. We need to make sure we meet their expectations with students for IEPs and our English learners. And then communication planning is the key throughout this process. And I think we're gaining some momentum now. We've gone through a couple difficult months trying to work through some additional challenges, and we seem to be kind of getting on the right pace right now. Reopening timeline. We've had task force meetings that have been taking place now for several weeks. All areas of the district have been included: maintenance, bus drivers, cafeteria, teaching staff, and administration. And we've developed general plans to return to school within the guidelines. We did receive quite a response from our surveys. Over 4,400 parents responded, 1,100 students, 350 faculty. We are meeting with administration and department chairs now, and then district meetings with DC and teacher curriculum groups. So scenarios. We have 3. We come back in person. We follow the guidelines. Every student comes to school. We do a blended learning where students come on A days and students come on B days, and it's on alpha slice, and I'll go into greater detail. Or we are remote. In our return to school survey results, you can see the overwhelming majority of responses prefer to come back at 100%, full in-person within guidelines. Second, then, is a blended learning. So we're at over 80% in all categories of either in-person or a blended option, which I found interesting in all 3 of those survey results. The different reasons that they would choose blended or remote learning as their first choice, and there's just some different reasons of if they believed it wasn't safe, or they believed in-person learning. So the next 3 I'll just kind of move through, and then I'll get to blended learning A/B days. Now, in the guidance, the main item that concerns me, the question is, kid test positive, who has to go home? In the guidance, if a kid tests positive, any student or teacher who was within 6 feet of that student for 15 minutes of time has to now quarantine for 14 days. When we have 26 to 30 students in a classroom, it is not possible for us to maintain 6 feet. So if student A tests positive, has been in 6 periods with full classrooms, that could be 24 students who are now going to be quarantined for 14 days.
And 6 teachers?
Would not be the teachers unless the teacher was within 6 feet for 15 minutes, which I would hope our teachers wouldn't be.
How close are we gonna be square footage wise with the kids in a classroom? Will we spread it all out? Get rid of stuff that they don't need in the room?
If we are full, we cannot be 6 feet apart.
What about for AB?
AB, we can do 6 feet.
How close can we get to 6 feet?
If we're AB, we're between 3 and 4 feet. Is that our last look?
No, if we're full in.
Full in, you're 3 or 4 feet apart, Rich. We cannot get more than 4 feet when you have, because we can't put desks in front of the doors. So you have to have
Right.
an egress there.
So it's 6 feet, 15 minutes
You know what?
with a mask.
God,
Yes.
but to add to that,
So,
no matter, guys, the reality is that even if you have the space, the students don't do it. I mean, I dropped my daughter off today at volleyball camp, and while all the precautions were put into place, you know, the temperatures were being checked, the certification, you know, sheets were being handed in, they clustered. So
Yeah.
the reality of it is that it's going to be hard enough if we have the 6 feet of space, but when you have everybody present, even if we had the space, we are increasing our liability to impact more students because they cluster.
they're adults, they can
Yeah.
be schooled.
Yeah,
And that's just, that's socialization,
I understand
that's just, you know, that's just what it is.
Yes,
And then you have a diversity of people who honestly are believing that, you know, they're coming from homes that believe that it's all a figment of everybody's imagination because we're so split, you know, in society in regards to whether or not it's a reality. But that same person who believes it's a figment of their imagination, if their entire household gets impacted, trust and believe, they're going to come right back to us and say, what precautions did we put in place?
Yeah.
Just
no, it's,
the first ones to scream and say that it doesn't exist and it's not there I've been practicing, and I know there's others like me who are attorneys. They're the calls that I get that I say you don't have a case. I get those calls all the time. Trust me, it will happen.
yeah. So we'll get through, let me get through a couple of these things and then we'll kind of regroup again here. Just kind of what this would look like. And this is coming from our teachers and department chairs. We spent quite a bit of time receiving feedback here over the last 10 days on what they believe would work best. I will be bringing back to the board in August an updated calendar. Who knows what it's going to look like by the time we get to August. But right now we would add an institute date at the beginning of the year. We would take out Columbus Day because we're supposed to have the SAT that Wednesday. We cannot go to school or have an institute day on election day. So that's been taken out. So we will have an updated calendar ready for approval. But this is just kind of a draft run, kind of what it would look like. Students would go every other day, A days, B days, the A day. So the teacher would teach the same lesson, an A day and a B day, and then the students would be given assignments, additional work, possibly an online on their off day, so to speak. Now, there was discussion of going A day, B day, day off, A day, B day, day off, with preparing students for remote. Our teachers responded with, knowing that remote is a possibility, if we're back in session, they're going to they'll be able to do a better job preparing our students for that remote learning now that they know it's certainly a possibility. You know, last time around, it seemed like it was a Thursday, Wednesday, the rumor started we might not be in school. Thursday, we're out. Monday, we don't come back to school. And so where there was some thought and consideration to a day in the middle, our teachers wanted to spend as much time in front of students as they could, and yet believed they could better prepare students for that remote learning now that we know that's a possibility. Because certainly our planning here over the next 4 weeks is going to be planning for the remote learning as well as a blended or a full return to school. But this is just kind of an example of what the calendar would look like. So each lesson presented twice. Certain segments of students, IEP students, English language learners would come to school every day. And so, you know, the benefits, smaller class size, smaller bus route runs, less congestion in hallways, just something to consider. And then parents and students will begin the opportunity to select remote learning for the entire semester. We talked about that a little bit.
Scott, when you're in that, do we have the ability, I know you want to do the same lesson twice. So Monday, Tuesday would be the same lesson for A and B.
Yeah.
The kids that are at home, I've had a few people call me on this, like, will their kid be required to be in, you know, could we do like, do we have the ability to do like a Zoom camera in the back or
I can't hear
so they
him.
can?
He's asking, when the kid's at home, can we still do a Zoom camera or anything there? We talked about all that, Rich, and what it came down to, logistically, legally now, because of everything that's going on, we can do that.
Okay.
Teachers did not believe that's the best use of that instructional time, that they should focus on the kids that are in front of them that day, and then the students then on their supposed off day are working independently. Now, on the remote learning, we're going to have some synchronous learning, which we did not do in the spring. So that's where this is going to look much, much different this year, will be the remote learning. But to answer your question, on their day that they are not in front of the teacher, they won't have any synchronous learning with that teacher during that time.
You know, if we're remote learning, that's because we're closed, basically.
Correct. If we're all remote, that's because we're closed.
And then how does that work then for students who may then be, say, a high school senior who have younger siblings at home, my parents, a police officer, mom's a nurse. You know, they have to be online 9 to 3, but they're sitting there looking at their, you know, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old brother, whatever it may be.
We're going to adhere to this schedule, and the reason is, I think we still have to have some level of expectations, and that's going to be our challenge in this. Once you fall into mediocrity, it becomes very, very difficult to get back out. And so sometimes in the state of Illinois, they accept mediocrity, if not promote it. I thought in the spring, when the first thing they did was come out and say you can't grade anything, I thought that was poor. And so I think even on our remote learning, our level of expectation for our students is reasonable, and we will ask for them to be engaged during those times. Now, if there are extenuating circumstances, counselors will work with students and families to make this work, but the majority of our students should be able to log on. In fact, if you go to the remote learning AB split, you can kind of see how, once again, this is a draft, but we would look at something like first hour, 9 to 10, second hour, 10:15, 11:15, office hours in the middle for the teachers in the middle of the day. Then we would go third hour, fourth hour. The next day would then be fifth, sixth, seventh, and then 0 hour. So each student would then have an hour. Now, that doesn't mean the teacher is going to be in front of them for an entire hour, but they've got to check in at 9 o'clock, and here's what we're working on during that day. We learned a lot from summer school. It was a more positive experience having the synchronous learning, particularly parents who had students experience in the spring and then take an English 2, 3, or 4. Thought this was much, much better, even though in summer school it was only a 45-minute window that they had to check in. They thought that kept their student much more engaged, much more on task.
When you say check-in, what are they doing?
So basically, Chris, they're going to be getting a lesson at 9 o'clock. So first hour, if it's Algebra 1, students have to be on Teams or whatever that platform is that they'll already know ahead of time, because as long as we're able to start school. and teacher will be teaching that class. So an example, Mr. Terrella came in every day and taught his economics class from his classroom. So he turned his laptop around to show himself at the whiteboard doing the supply, demand, the curves, and so it's teachers are going to be teaching during that time. There will be times where they'll be doing group work, where teachers may have these 5 kids log on, jump in at 9, the next 5 at 9:15, but there's that connectivity that we didn't have in the spring, and I think that's something we missed. Anything to add there, Brian or Amy?
No, I think you did it pretty well.
We're good? Okay.
You brought up, I've heard like Zoom and Teams. Would there be one platform that everyone would be required to
Okay.
use?
Brian, go ahead and answer that.
Yeah,
Yeah, is there going to be one, the question is there going to be one platform? So here's, it's going to kind of go department by department. We're going to do better than we did in the spring, but Brian will cover some of that.
So everybody's home will be Microsoft Teams. Everybody's going to begin in Microsoft Teams. All students will have their Microsoft Teams. All teachers will have a Teams site. That would be the basis for every point of learning if we're in the remote environment. Our summer school teachers, every single teacher used Microsoft Teams as their home base, and it seemed to work very, very well. We are working with, if we have to go all remote, we will be looking at utilizing the Teams and WebEx. WebEx will allow our teachers to be able to have group meetings and see on screen more than just the 9 people like a Teams does. Very similar to what the Zoom feature is, and most people are very familiar with the Zoom. But one of the other benefits of using the WebEx is the ability for teachers to make phone calls through their computer, to be able to reach out and contact parents, and parents not being able to see their phone numbers. So that's one of the reasons that we're going to be looking at that. So that would be another resource, but there's going to be the main hub of Teams where everybody will begin.
So WebEx is something we've used all summer in our meetings. In fact, Deidre, when we held our meetings, it was a WebEx, and each teacher would have their own WebEx address, and I think that will work better than having the multiple, the Zoom, the Google, everything else, and so that's something that we'll have to purchase for every teacher, but we've put in the budget, and I think that'll be a nice addition in addition to the Teams.
WebEx allows them to put a presentation up, right?
Correct. So WebEx, they can have all of their students on there. They can see their students' faces, but then they can also put their PowerPoint or their presentation or whatever they're working on at the same time. Yes, I think that will help. Okay, so I'm on the remote learning A-B split. Go to the next one. Calendar considerations. As we said, right now, it's all kind of up in the air. We may see what happens in terms of a start date, but right now we're looking to first day of student attendance on the 20th. We will not do back to school nights. We won't do delayed starts. October 14th, as I said, will be student testing. We would put one of our 5 teacher planning days on October 19th. And then, as I said, Election Day, state mandated holiday. Let me go through a couple questions. Some of these I can answer, some of them I can't, but they're questions that we have right now. So the protocol for positive COVID-19 tests. Protocol is 14 days, that individual has to be home. In addition, anyone who had contact with that individual within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. Now, in terms of contact tracing and how we do all that connection, we have to contact the Will County Department of Health in each scenario. They will help with the contact tracing. We will contact every parent of a student who was within the 6 feet and inform them your student must be quarantined for 14 days. Their question is going to be, well, who was it? We can't tell them who it was. We will also notify other individuals in that classroom. Your child, there was an individual in the classroom, but your child was not within that 6 feet period. That's the protocol at this time. As Illinois Department of Public Health or ISB changes that, we'll monitor, we'll change to do directly what they're saying right now is the protocol. We'll see what it ends up being at the time we start school. We anticipate updates in the next 3 to 5 days from their original guidance. That was kind of with their window. So we'll see.
So I see that scenario if we're in person and we
Yeah.
can't distance. I mean, I would think that it's likely at some point there will be a case in the district. I don't know, but.
Oh, there's no question.
Yeah.
If we're back to school, there's going to be a positive test.
So
It may
is
not
there-
come from school, but yeah.
So as part of that plan, are we doing anything on like kind of cohort structures or something where we can keep, I know scheduling is going to be a nightmare, but that we can keep some of the same kid, like you have a freshman, I don't know, 60% of them take English 1,
So keep those
algebra.
two.
Yeah, I mean, is there any way you can kind of do a cohort? Because I mean, I think this starts, I mean, I think once there's a case in there, is there any way to kind of reduce that if we can't get them 6 feet apart?
That's a good question. And that's something we can look at because I anticipate us redoing the master schedule. So we can take a look at that. The problem, ultimately the problem's always going to be the elective. Because those freshmen, once they take an elective, that throws us out of the water.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you can.
For the
can cut
majority
down
of their day,
Yeah,
yeah.
for the majority of their day. That's what I'm.
Yeah. So, look
Kind of
at an
thinking.
alpha slice of all your honors algebra, honors bio, keep as many together as you can.
Right.
Yeah, something we can look at. Something we can look at to mitigate that. Yeah, it's. Problem is, like you said, once we get a couple, it's just
Yeah.
gonna.
I probably agree with that too, but.
Wiping down doorknobs, he's putting hand sanitizer everywhere, but if they're 6 feet apart with a mask for 15 minutes, then all bets are off. So once you get a case in the school's contaminated. End of game.
I don't know if I'd go that far.
I'm just telling you, earlier you said he's gonna wipe down doorknobs several times throughout the day. So you have what, a 2-second interaction with the doorknob?
Joe's just saying, at any time, if we have a case, yeah, if we have a case, then we're in trouble. I mean, wiping down doorknobs, wiping down desks, this is going to be a challenge.
You're
So-
chasing your tail.
So we're in phase 4, right?
Phase 4.
Phase 3, we would, obviously, we had to go back, but we're tied to several other counties and municipalities throughout Northwest or
Correct.
Northeast.
Correct. So we're in
Yeah.
phase 4.
So I mean, if somebody in, I don't know, Schaumburg, Schaumburg School District shoots up way up high and also the positivity rate and things like that go, 0.2% one way, we could be shut down and it has nothing to do with us, right?
Isn't there a high school now up in McHenry County or
Zurich.
something?
Like Zurich.
Like Zurich.
But it's, I think there were 3 positive tests. It's all over the news. They were all athletes, so they've shut down all their camp. Mohammed Seymour had a unsanctioned prom this summer where there were a handful of kids who tested positive and they shut down their summer camps.
You're talking about just a positive test.
I think
They-
HF shut down their summer camp.
Did they? I have not heard that.
So,
Yeah,
in-person daily,
yeah, they shut them down.
Shut them down? Okay.
in-person daily or AB schedule, if we're in an AB schedule, half the class can test positive and we don't have to send anybody home.
As long as they're 6 feet apart.
Yeah.
Okay. But, the challenge, I think maybe it was you and I that talked about this, Rich, that's assuming that they're not in volleyball if we're playing volleyball, not in cross country if we're not playing cross country.
Right.
And the reality is,
Right.
our kids are gathering outside of school. High school kids
Right.
are gathering. They just are. And the reality is, I'm not concerned about the spread within our building. I'm concerned about the spread outside of the building.
Correct.
And that impact our operation, because Kids are playing sports. They are. Kids are socializing. They're going to work. You know, they're stocking shelves. They're mowing. They're cutting grass with their buddies. Those things are occurring, and that's what personally I believe is going to lead to the spread. I think we can mitigate some of it inside our walls, but you know, we only have them 6-7 hours a day right now, and so to Joe's point, a couple positive tests blows this thing out of the water.
So how quick could we convert?
And then we go to remote, which we already have a plan for.
Yeah.
How quick, you know, if we go all kids in class every day, August 15th, and we make it,
What trigger?
Here, one minute, 1 second, Deidre. Rich is asking a question. I'll let you know exactly what he's asking. Go ahead, Rich.
we make it to
Oh, okay.
September 20th before the first flare-up starts.
Yep.
And instead of having it pop up, how quick could we flip over to AB?
Immediately. So the question is, if we start everybody and we get to September 20th, and then all of a sudden we have a couple positive tests, how quickly could we get to AB? And my answer would be, you know, if immediately we would be able to go to an AB schedule.
Then it would at least meet the guidelines.
But why
And we
would we
wouldn't have to kick
even
kids out.
entertain
Right.
starting everybody when we can't even socially distance with everybody? Why would we even entertain that?
Yeah,
I don't think anyone's ever looked at it.
Yeah, the question is, why would we start if we know we can't social distance with everybody here? You know, and I think that's quite honestly the discussion that is going to need to take place between now and the 1st of August. I think right now we have to continue to get all 3 plans ready to go. But as we continue to work through this, you know, I'm going to talk to individual board members. We may have to have one more meeting. I anticipate the state government at some point probably giving direction in terms of where to go. There are some rumors that potentially they'd get involved with setting a start date of the school year, something that we kind of anticipated. We've done a calendar. If we start the Tuesday after Labor Day, we've done a calendar if we start October 1st. So we kind of have those ready to go. Let me get through a couple more of these questions, and then we'll get back together here. Self-certification, I don't know if we'll do that, so we'll skip over that one. Mask protocol for people on school property when you're not able to social distance. You know, students are going to have to wear them, teachers are going to have to wear them. Is there an option to not wear a mask? If students go outside and they're able to social distance, then they can take that mask off. That's in the guidance. Some of our grade schools have discussed having break periods and actually taking their students outside, letting them spread apart, take off their mask, put it back on. So if we're socially distanced, if our principals decide to allow students to go outside and eat, that would be an opportunity to take off their mask. They're going to have to take it off to eat, obviously. So, you know, but if they're in the classroom, they're going to be expected to wear it. Originally, guidance said face shields were acceptable for teachers. Then 48, 72 hours later, they came back and said no. That's not an effective barrier. That's still being strongly discussed, I know, right now with ISB. Options available for students who are deemed at high risk. They're not going to be expected to come to school, and we will provide them educational services. Will more parking be available? If we go AB days, it will, and that's something that we'll be ready to do. Lunch service right now are...
That's a negative ghostwriter.
Yeah, I don't see how it's going to work. I don't see how it's going to work. We'll be able to provide bag lunches for our free and reduced students, but I just don't see any possibility of offering lunch. Standing learning platform, we kind of discussed that.
I obviously didn't read ahead.
That's all right. Fall sports, extracurricular activities. Your guess is as good as mine. I would love to be able to tell you we'll have athletic and extracurricular opportunities for our students this year. I just don't know. I'm not terribly optimistic at this time, but But I would love to see opportunities for those kids. I just don't know. Extended passing periods, not necessarily extended passing periods, but we will be once again looking at one-way hallways, keep flow moving one way. We'll also look to open up our buildings so students can pass through the front like we used to. In all of our buildings, students can kind of dip out, walk along the front sidewalk, and then back in. Now, of course, that goes completely against active
out the
shooter.
window. Why
You know? So it goes against that. Once again, these are discussions we're having. If we're AB, we won't necessarily need to do that. You know, but yet again, you know, all of our kids leave at 3 o'clock every day. So something to look at, something to consider. PE, students will not be dressing for PE. PE will look significantly different. We'll have more health and wellness, and we're working on that now. How often can classrooms be sanitized? Well, our thought was to have students wipe down the desks after they leave and throw it away as they leave. Every night our classrooms will be cleaned. You know, the contact surface, once again, while a concern, it's not the greater concern. It's that it's that airborne and students being together. And then a laptop available. Yeah, if a student needs a laptop, we will have that ready to go. We're also going to encourage students to bring their own device to start the school year. And that way, they can begin to learn on their own device what that remote learning might look like. Whether they're going to be utilizing their phone, whether they're going to be utilizing a Chromebook, whatever they may have at home. But certainly we have devices available, and we'll have those ready to go.
Do we have enough?
Not for every student, but we have over 3,000 devices ready to go. We handed out less than 150 in the spring. So
I just anticipate one of the bigger complaints that I had heard was, you know, multiple students sharing one device, a kid in 4th grade, a kid in 8th grade.
Yeah, and that's why we're going to encourage.
Sharing one.
Yeah, we'll encourage those students to come in and get one. You know, our discussion right now is, should we be utilizing carts in classrooms and having a kid use it and then sitting it down, and then Johnny gets it next hour and then Alex gets it the next hour? So we may not utilize carts as we've done historically. So, but we'll be prepared. The rest is kind of curriculum and instruction and kind of some of the goals and things we're looking at. We just hit the 3 different scenarios. Our summer work, we've devised district leadership teams that are working with each department, and this is to ensure accountability and consistency. That's something we were lacking in the spring. We won't let that happen again. And so what we're doing here is, these are the leadership teams, but then also teachers. There'll be a biology teacher, there'll be a physics teacher, there'll be a math and algebra teacher, a geometry teacher on these teams, so that every teacher is consistent. We're covering the same things. We don't have a physics teacher doing 25 lessons and another one doing 12. We need to make sure we're consistent across the board. So these administrators are working with the department chairs and teachers to ensure that consistency and that level of expectation across the board. Once again, something we were not able to do in the spring, but I think this is absolutely paramount to our success this year, to get the development at the teacher level of this. These are our expectations in our classes, if we're blended, if we're at home, and then obviously if we're here every day. July 9th, we had a virtual team meeting with liaisons, DCs, overview of the fall scenarios, goals, and then to set up our next steps. 9 through 15, you can see we're planning, submitting forms. That's already started. I know science and English have both concluded 2-hour meetings. We received the feedback from those meetings, and we're moving in the right direction. Course groups then will begin to meet to be ready for the 3 different options as we've discussed. Through Title I and Title II, we will use some of our professional development money to pay our teachers for time this summer. Each licensed teacher counselor is eligible for 5 hours at $25, a whopping $100, but they do appreciate that. And I do think that's a good use of professional development. It's title, it has to be line item for professional development. So teachers are putting in time this summer, and we'll pay for a little bit of that. Our summer course group meetings and goals, on our blended days or remote days, students are working independently, remote, all online, both synchronous and asynchronous instruction. We put a sample of a blended, this is English. I thought it was a pretty good example of what we're kind of looking at, just to kind of give you an idea as a reference, and you can look at that later. Once again, some instructional experiences, our blended AB days, remote virtual, check-in activities, direct instruction, lecture, discussion, labs, demos, hands-on, the vocational activities, in-person and blended, simulated hands-on experience and activities when they're remote, etc. When they're not live, pre-recorded videos or notes, reading, active reading, some assignment completion or submission, practices and exercises, projects, peer collaboration, small group activities, research, writing, etc. Different things we'll be doing. Consistency, grading, and grade book practices. We've asked for departments to submit departmental guidelines, and then the summative, formative percentages. Once again, I think it's important that we're consistent from teacher to teacher. And then any questions or any comments or concerns? I know it's a lot, and this is going to be constantly changing and evolving. Last week the IHSA, you can have contact. We can have contact, so I think that was 3 or 4 days. Was it 3? And then they
One practice.
One practice. By the time most people got prepared, they had one practice and then they took it right away. So, I don't think any of our football teams even got in a 7-on-7. So that's kind of, this is a moving target. What I think we'll do at some point this week, I'm going to kind of summarize this in some of these slides, and we'll send it home to all the parents. Just to give them an idea, it's either going to be 1, 2, or 3. And as we continue to monitor this and work with ISB and IDPA, Department of Public Health, we'll determine what will be at the start of the school year. I can see the need for another board meeting between now and then, and that's something I'll work with Mr. Kostick to schedule, to maybe the first week of August to have another discussion on this. But right now, certainly a moving target. There are some districts who have come out and said right now, we're starting remote or we're starting blended. Most of the elementaries are going back full time. Now with the elementaries, their students aren't socializing outside like ours are. They're playing with the kids in the neighborhood, the same kids they get on the bus with, the same kids they go to school with. And we have a little different dynamic there.
Scott?
Yes?
Back to my question from when we first started.
Yep.
Brad was still there. People that choose to not send their kid to school.
I can't hear.
People, I'll repeat the question.
Thank you.
I 100% respect anybody's opinion to do that. So we are, this year, responsible for the cost or whatever we got to provide. Okay.
Who's going to repeat it?
So, back in the days of truancy, so are we responsible if, your family's claim is you're on lockdown, and I know people that are, and we were for 90 days, because my wife was, but if you decide to do that, and then we find out you're here, you're at the mall, you're out popping around, are you done? You're out?
No. So the question is, if somebody decides they're not coming in, they're going to stay remote, and then we find out if they're at the mall or doing this, that, or the other, are they out? And the answer is no. That would never stand up in a court of law. We're going to have to provide education for those students. Even if they say they're staying at home, but they're going to the mall or running around, whatever, we're still going to be bound in this unique time. So
For the parents that will actually let their kids play them for that, we can, if you're out, right? No school activities, no school dances, no games.
I will have to get confirmation from our attorney. I will go to the board attorney with that question. I would want an opinion in writing before we would take that stance. So I will do that for the
You
board.
can't have your cake and eat it too.
Exactly,
You can't
exactly.
go
And
both ways.
that's why I'll make sure we're covered there from a liability perspective. Because if we are, I agree. I agree with you there. But I think that's something that we would definitely need to run by council before we make that determination.
So I think,
So I had obviously a million questions that seemingly you addressed the majority of them. One of the things I did want to ask, and I didn't want to interrupt you because you were on a roll, was the goal of the Alpha Slice. That is clearly to have approximately 50% of kids in each class, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so just for an example, I looked at my Skyward today and all my classes are populated. I know it's due to change. I anticipate it is because I think we're doing blended as well. But in one of my classes, I have 32 students, 22 of which are A through L.
Yeah.
So that's not even close to 50-50. Are they going to be going back and looking at the rosters as far as even, I know it would be impossible to make every class 50-50, but as close as possible?
Yeah, ours are pretty close. I don't think we had any 22. Brian had run some of those numbers.
So,
Go ahead.
Okay.
Brian.
so I'd get a quick peek, and we're close. In some of the classes that they're not, the PPS directors are going to go back through the master schedule and start looking at individual courses that aren't as balanced, A through L and N through Z, and start making some scheduling adjustments. That's the next step as we continue to develop and all these changes come into place.
Okay.
Yep. It's a good question, though, Beth. Good question.
Do you, in conversations with any of the feeders, are any of them looking to do AB schedules?
Right now, the feeder's plan is to go back to school.
Because I think that's going to be a challenge with their alpha splits in terms of, childcare issues for parents.
Their issue would be childcare. There's no question. Their issue would be childcare. And I think that also I think the dynamics is much different. Their students don't move from class to class like ours do every period.
Yep.
And so that eases some of that. Our feeders also don't have 2,000 students in their buildings, so.
Yeah, their teachers see between 18 and 26 kids. We see 150 a day, high school teachers, in a regular day.
Chris,
I was
question?
just going to ask, and you've touched on communication. I mean, you're going to send something out now.
Yep.
Also, incoming communication. So is there someone who's going to be set up to be kind of the point person to take all these questions I think are going to be coming in? I don't know if it's a district or it's building by building.
We'll draw straws tomorrow.
Yeah, Dr. Murphy didn't put his finger out his enough.
I took lots of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot, but but more importantly, if something did break, I think, or there was a case or something, I think there has to be some like a point person or something at each building. Probably.
Yeah, and Chris's question is, where will the questions come and who will be the point person? And that's going to have to, in the buildings, it's going to have to be the building principal. And when you get our final plan, that'll be in there. So that's part of the template we received from ISB, and that will be in there. So in terms of the contact, who's making contact with the parents, and that's in there. That's a good point.
And the Illinois Department of Health guidelines or guidance that they've set out, they haven't addressed if you can't be socially distanced. Meaning if you can't offer that, you have to do blended.
No.
No.
If wear a mask and to the best of your ability. If you're gonna, if you want to be within 6 feet, you can be within 6 feet. Wear a mask. Yes. They have not come out and said you must be 6 feet apart. That is not in the rule. It's recommended, but it's not. It's not. No.
Scott?
Yes.
And who's going to go against that recommendation?
Go ahead, Rich.
My belief is that either we're gonna skate through this or it's gonna blow up and be all remote. I don't think there's gonna be, even if we start at AB, if it's gonna blow up, I think the state's gonna shut it down. So how much of a benefit is it if we go AB from the start? you're only putting half the information in the kids because you're blowing every other day. If
See,
you're repeating
I don't agree. So the question is, if we go A-B,
from the start.
from the start, you're only putting half the information in the kids. I taught on the block schedule. I enjoyed teaching on the block schedule, and I think as long as our teachers are able to have some time to plan, they're going to be able to do this, and I think they'll be able to do it effectively. The biggest benefit that I see from the A-B schedule is mitigating the contact and exposure. Either it's an individual kid, that individual kid can go home and doesn't take 24 kids with him. Because you're right. This is either going to work, we're going to skate through it, or it's going to explode.
My thought is if we got 6 weeks, like I said before, is that a big benefit? I mean, I think if it does come back and explode, I think the state's going to step in and we're going to be remote.
Yeah, so Rich
And
is,
even if we're abiding by everything, if another school here, another school there, it pops up, then they're going to say the whole state's down again.
yeah, that's certainly the possibility that if it does pop up, that the state will intervene and shut everybody down. I would agree with that. I think at this point, I think our best strategy is to prepare for all three. I will continue to send information as our teachers and teams develop these plans. The comprehensive plan will be done by the end of this month and ready for the board. And then we'll see what direction we go. I still anticipate quite a bit more guidance from the state of Illinois between now and the second or third week of August. I think that there's much more to come. I don't think it makes sense to pick a lane now and say this is exactly what we're doing. I think we need to plan for all three, have our teachers ready for all three, communicate to our parents, get the list of kids who, for whatever reason, are not going to participate in person, and plan there. And I think those are our next steps. And I appreciate everybody's thoughts and opinions. Just like society, there's probably 20% that think we need to stay home, 20% think we need to go, and then we're a lot of people in the middle, depending upon what news channel they watch that day. And so, we'll try and make the best decision as we work through this. Does anybody have any other questions?
So I just have two.
Yeah, go ahead.
So last year when we
Scott, I
went,
have one quick
Okay, go ahead, Deidre.
One quick question. What I didn't hear about is what if you suspect someone ill and they don't get tested? So they come, they may have a fever, you turn them home, or a teacher says, this kid was really coughing today, runny nose, but maybe no fever. Is there any kind of protocol in regards to that? Because as we know with this whole thing, is that everyone that is contagious doesn't necessarily get a fever.
Yes, so we can
have several different.
Yeah, we can request that student stays home for 14 days, or goes and gets a COVID test. But we can request, once they're sent to the isolation room for fever, cough, we can request they stay home for 14 days. And that's going to be a challenge, because there'll be parents that want that kid back the next day. But we're going to have to be very diligent to try and protect the majority. I think Aaron had a question, then Chris. Aaron?
go ahead, Chris.
So mine is just what is ultimately the board, when you say we're going to bring it back to the board, what is the board deciding?
We have to present a whole plan to the board. I'm going to look for guidance, but I don't think we take action and the board makes decisions on, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. Otherwise, we're going to have meetings at 2 o'clock in the morning if it's sleeting outside. I think that I'm going to look for board consensus in determining what we begin with. And then I really believe, like Rich said, once we're into this, And once we're going down the river, it's the government's going to be the one to kind of make decisions if we stay or go. Now, obviously, if we have outbreaks and we have teachers, if we're missing teachers, we're missing students, at some point we would have to say, okay, we need to go remote, if it's this building, that building, or the other. But I think only time will tell as we begin to work our way through this. I think we'll know when it's time to do one or the other. But I anticipate much more government guidance, if that answers your question, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to set up, if we're gonna have another board meeting and get this, I mean, I'm assuming Illinois will give some sort of guidance at some point, but if there isn't any, when are we gonna set up that board meeting, and when are we gonna make a decision on how we're gonna start this?
If there's no additional guidance, the first week of August, I would like to tell the parents, we're gonna start with this, that, or the other. Because by then, we will already have had the opt-out kids. I will have already provided the information to the parents that says, we'll be doing this or that in person, or this if we're at home. And so all of that needs to take place in the next 2 weeks. And then I think the first week of August is when we say, okay, based upon the data and where we are today, this is how we would begin the school year.
Can we just communicate that when we?
Yeah,
send
that'll
out
be
this-
part of
this
what I
week?
send out,
Okay,
yes,
great.
this week, yep. Any other questions?
Great job. So, and the governor hasn't flat out said that, I know this is going to sound like a silly question, but he's going to have a drop dead date where this is the guidance by a certain date, or are they all just going off the fact that the folks in Chicago don't go back till after Labor Day, so it's not as pressing?
You're exactly right. I think that's the focus. We'll see if he sets everybody's going back to school on this date. That's something I've anticipated and then kind of heard today that might be a possibility. So if he does that, we'll be able to adjust and be ready for that. But that's a good point, Joe. A lot of their focus is the CPS, who doesn't go back until the week after Labor Day. But in terms of
For them, I think they've got all the time in the world, so not all the time in the world, but they've got
an extra
3
month.
more weeks to get this solved than the rest of the state.
Yeah.
It starts
Yeah.
back on the 20th of August.
Yep, and like I said, I anticipate additional guidance here in the next 5 to 10 days from ISB. They're just continuing to work through this. It's really a challenge and really tough, certainly.
So are there any school districts?
Well, I hope to the extent that it can be, that it isn't one size fits all. I mean, different size districts and different infection rates, and I'd imagine downstate, this problem is not nearly as prevalent as it is in Cook County or even surrounding suburbs.
Correct. It's not. I've talked to several of the districts in our surrounding area I've spoken with. They have not submitted their plans publicly. The majority are doing a blended model, the ones that I've spoken to. And I know one sent out a questionnaire today, just at 4 o'clock today, to say, hey, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? What are you thinking? What are you thinking? And so I'm getting everybody's answers. Everybody's replying all. But we're in a very similar boat to everyone else in terms of timing. Some of the northern districts have already come out and said this is what we're doing, but most of the surrounding districts are in our same time frame of trying to gauge where to go.
So do most school districts start around the 19th, or is it like the 12th, the 1st? Is it all?
It's from the 12th to the 19th, there and around here.
So we probably expect something before the 12th so they don't start them and then shut them down. And,
Yes, certainly. There are some districts that start a week before ours. Majority are right there in our week. Majority are in our week of the suburban schools. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
We know, I'm sorry. I keep hearing the term of getting guidance from the state. Is it just that? Is it guidance, or how much of this is going to be mandatory? Because, they might come out some guidelines that for our district aren't practical. or, you know, just like as I stated earlier, more practical than others? Are these just guidelines or is it a blend of some things mandatory, some things are not?
Yeah, see, that's a
You
good
might not
point.
know the answer to that yet.
There is a blend. There's a blend of some things you have to do, some things you don't. A lot of it will come down to liability and whether or not it's practical for us. You know, the face coverings has seemed to be a mandatory thing. You have to do this. You know, the 6 feet social distancing, that's a guideline. You know, so that is a good point. That is a good point. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, thank you on that.
All right, if there's no more discussion regarding the opening of school, we'll need a motion to adjourn to closed session to discuss collective negotiating. Do I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.